get to these PowerPoint slides.
Okay. Yep,
Okay.
go ahead and finish it up.
And,
Okay.
and I couldn't find the folder.
Oh, is that right? It's
I
gone,
never
so you're
found
kind of...
it until like 2 months ago. Livid. As livid.
Yeah. Just when you needed it at that
Yeah,
point.
exactly.
All right, good afternoon. This is our last session, our last series on leading a multi-generational workforce. My name's Scott Van Ness. I'm an instructor of operations management at the University of Colorado Springs. And we're going to go ahead and jump right into this. Our last series on this is I want to dig into some more nuts and bolts and to give you some tools to be successful with your organization. So I want to start out with who's doing this right, what companies are actually hitting the mark on this, and we're going to dig into those. That's pretty interesting. I really want to spend some time on mission and vision. Mission and vision is something that a lot of us dread doing, putting mission and vision statements together, but I think we can show you how bringing the millennial workforce into that process can invigorate that for you. The workforce generations are different. We can't say they're the same because they're not. But we've got some strategies that work in there. We're going to look at that, and we're going to get in this idea of FIO. We'll talk about that in a second. Last, we'll bring it all together. And finally, again, if we have any aha moments, we'll talk about those if there's something that goes on right now. Okay, so again, this is our learning objective. This is a must. To stay competitive in this field, you're going to have to manage 3, 4, and sometimes 5 workforce generations at the same time. You need to learn how to take advantage of the benefits that each of these generations bring to your teams, and understanding the newest and soon to be the largest workforce generation, our millennial workforce, is going to be essential to that. So we're going to look at strategies and try to give you some tools to kind of go through there. All right, I'm going to skip through that, and we'll start right here on who is doing this right. Now, every year, Fortune puts out these lists of the best companies to work for. And a couple years ago, they started to break this down now by the workforce generations. And so this is the one I've got up here right now. This is the best companies to work for. And this is the top 5 for millennials. You can see some of these companies you may have heard of. Quicken Loans, they're on television all the time. They're advertising, and that's become an excellent place to work with. We looked at, did a little research on Quicken Loans, some of the things that they were doing, but a lot of collaborative workspaces, they're big on that. They've gotten rid of a lot of the formal feedback loops and gone to informal feedback as a way to drive that forward. So that's been a big plus for them. Initially, I was really surprised to see that because the commercials are kind of, I don't know, they're kind of annoying, but it's looked at as a great place to work. We see some of the other ones. Kimley Horn of Raleigh, North Carolina, they show up on a lot of lists. And then the different parts of the country that these businesses are in, other than Quicken Loans being headquarters in Detroit, that's not necessarily a desirable place for millennials to work. It's not on the list, but they have offices around the country. So that's interesting. So that's kind of the first group. Next one I wanted to look at was the top organizations for Gen Xers to look at. And this is one to focus on who's doing this right. We see 2 companies on here, Kimley Horn and Quicken Loans, that are on both the Gen X and the millennial list in the top 5. And there are some repeats as you go on, but those are 2. So there's somebody who's definitely hitting the mark on this, and we'll talk about some of the things that they've done. So that's definitely a plus right there. The last one is our boomer group. And none of these repeats, none of the top 10 in the boomer list, and I only have 5 listed, were on the top 10 of the other organizations. So that's kind of showing you nobody's doing this real well yet, or getting better at it, but nobody's got to be an expert. So, and I noticed some of or at least the companies on here on the boomer list are more traditional industries: financial services, construction, information technology, that issue, and those interests. Or those types of institutions seem to attract boomer employees. And so these industries may not be seeing the big influx of millennials yet. And we definitely have seen that with television marketing, radio marketing. We're seeing a small percentage, but it's going to change more in the next few years. So why the differences? Why are the differences between the companies? Well, kind of what we talked about here. One of the reasons is this idea of work structures. And I talk about this throughout the series, is the idea of flat organization structures. more companies have gotten rid of the tall structures. And when I entered the workforce, there were a lot of middle management positions. With the advent of information technology, we found we don't need as many middle managers anymore. So the organizations have tendency to look like this. And it's set up this way. And I notice organizational is with an S. I think it's actually it's an English, it's a British slide on there that I got that from. But we see there, we have a lot of employees reporting to just a manager or so. And so the organization is flat. With less hierarchy, there's less opportunities to move up in the organization. And with more of the age and experience at the top levels, that gap is actually increasing more. And not uncommon to see a director in their 70s and have employees in their 20s. And that's incredible. That's 50 years of living between there, and they're in the same organization reporting. That's the big issue, is people are staying in the jobs longer. It's not uncommon to see directors or sole proprietorship owners staying into their 70s, 70, 75 years old before they're ready to retire. And we're finding they're hitting their mark at that point. They're really at their peak. So with that, we're gonna see that's a challenge. So if your organization looks like this, and it might, this is something that can be an issue in bringing these workforce generations together. So other issue on this is we found this, and this is a survey written or put together by the University of North Carolina MBA program. And they cited this: 75% of the folks in the program say managing a multi-generational workforce is a challenge. And it's a challenge that we haven't taken on before. So setting the stage, it's pretty tough. 77% of those folks say their multi-generational workforce employees have different work expectations from the other generations. Expectations about work, what work means, what it's about, what you're getting out of it is quite a bit different. And this was really interesting. 72% are uncomfortable with younger employees managing older employees, and that's also a reality of the system here. Older employees being uncomfortable with that, and also younger employees having issues working with older employees. And with more older employees staying in the workplace, this is going to continue to be an issue. So let's dive into this a little more. What I'm telling companies right now, what we're preaching is this is a gotta do. You have to be able to do this. And we hear from some companies that said, I'm just not going to hire millennials. It's not going to happen. I don't want to deal with this. But if you don't, you're not going to be competitive. There are a lot of benefits of multi-generational workforces. The first one on here is flexibility. The multi-generational workforces have an innate ability, just by the structure and the diversity of the teams, to flex in different directions and succeed based on the strengths and the characteristics of those workforce generations. They're able to naturally make those moves. If leadership can bring that together, you can have a team that can really pivot and do the right things. Along with that is the idea of getting better decisions, broader-based inputs from multiple perspectives, especially with the influx of millennials into that situation. That is now an affluent let's say consumer generation. There's a lot of folks with a lot of money. And in this industry, we always seem to be looking at the 18 to 49 demographic. That's the area that's being tracked. That's Gen X, and it's also a lot of millennials. So if you're going to try to appeal to that, especially that second half or second third of that 18 to 49 group, who better to talk to about dealing with millennials, marketing to millennials than millennials? So that's definitely a big issue here. And then the idea of innovation and creativity. This is a huge win with this system. It's something that you don't want to miss out. These folks are bringing a lot to the table. So the organizations that are doing this right are doing these kinds of things. Okay, so I want to break into this idea of mission and vision statement. It's something that we're finding is becoming a critical need to address this, especially as millennials enter the workforce. Now, I talked about this as mission and vision being an extremely painful process. And in my experience, I have been on teams that have rewritten dozens of mission and vision statements. And I always tell my students about this. I'd rather go to the dentist, get a root canal, I've never had a root canal, but I think I'd rather have that than do a mission and vision statement. It's really hard. It takes a lot of time. And in fact, if you get a bunch of boomers and some Gen X's together and say, hey, we're going to do our new mission and vision statement, you'll just see the air come out of the room because it's tough to do. It's a real challenge. And what I'm telling folks is this is a gotta do. Every 5 years you need to address this. It is, I think the best quote I heard, it's a way to proclaim your dream. It's about who you are. And so this little cartoon says, the vision statement says, stop being such a jerk. And the team member says, this is our new mission statement. The committee had a difficult time agreeing on anything else. And that's been the big challenge in mission and vision statements, is getting people together in a room like this and trying to decide what we do. And you start from the ground up and you have to tear it apart and dig into it. And it's tough and people don't like to do it. But one thing I found is who does like to do this is millennials like to do this. We look at this as like a form of branding. And we find that this workforce generation brands themselves. They have a brand that they protect. And it's important to them that this is a good thing and it represents not just the organization that they work for, but they don't separate between work and home life like some workforce generations do. And because of that mission and vision branding is also part of them. That's a big part of their life. So this is a unique opportunity with up to 4 workforce generations to draw those teams together and get a great push to redo your mission and vision statement. Some advice we talk about this is make your goals and intentions measurable and understandable. So I saw this when I was doing some research and trying to find a good mission and vision statement. And this is somebody that works in childcare. And I don't normally see people have a mission and vision statement. But the organization here, it says, my mission for your child. Each and every day, for each and every child, I will do my best each day to give your child relevant knowledge, the courage to try new things, the curiosity to seek new answers, and the ability to be the best they can be. And oh yeah, we're gonna have fun in the process. So that really nailed it. And I think if I saw something like that and I was looking for childcare or a preschool, that would really impress me because that talks about what they do. That's that organization's passion. And getting that passion back into this process, bring millennials in. It's a big push. So I say this process can be invigorated by a multi-generational workforce. The university I work at, we went through this process. It's probably been about a year now where we brought teams in and we were going to redo our mission and vision statement. And a lot of us old timers from industry are like, oh great, this is going to be painful. But we did something different this time. We brought students in because it's their college of business. Their work, they go to school there, they pay to be there, so why not bring them in the process? And we found just an amazing amount of passion from them. Not just from them, that they invigorated it in us. And because of that, I think we got a really good mission and vision statement. We got a great one. And we're going to look at that again in a couple of years because we're going to have a new group of students. And they helped us define what we're doing or what we should be doing and who we are. And so you're going to get that with those team members. They're going to come in, they're going to bring that, and again, they look at that as a big part of their own personal brand. And maybe we should too, at least the folks that are in other workforce generations. Let's revisit what we're all about and kind of drive through this. So nuts and bolts things on mission and vision. The first thing you want to ask, and this is a tough question, is why do we exist? What are we about? And of course, most businesses, for-profit businesses, is about making money. You have to do that, but there's got to be something in the inner workings of the organization, the soul of the organization, that it's doing something. If it's information, if it's education, that's got to come to the top. And so in existence, something that makes us breathe, that makes our cells move around and do what we got to do, that needs to be addressed, and that should be at the heart of it. With the mission statement we saw from daycare, we saw that. We saw the soul of that person, what they were about in there. And if you haven't answered questions like that, that can be a challenge. And so facilitating these teams takes a lot of patience. Give yourself, I always say, a good 5 days to run through this. Not all day, but 2 or 3 hours a day and drive it out. A lot of times this root issue may not have been addressed in years. People who have worked for the company for 10, 20, 30 years, may have a tough time addressing this, and it helps to dig in and do this. This is something they talk about this with this was something from State Farm. And the advice they got was some of the best mission statements are an integral part of a company's branding strategy. It catalyzes customers to buy, but the mission statement should direct and influence all significant management decisions. So a good way to keep the mission and vision statements up front is every time we make a call, every time we do something, we can ask, how does this support what we're about? Does this really tell us or link to what we're trying to do here? So State Farm had a pretty simple one. It says State Farm's mission is to help people manage the risks of everyday life, recover from the unexpected, and realize their dreams. That's pretty hard hitting. That's what they do. And if it's something like that, and it probably took 2 weeks to craft that thing. It sounds simple, but to get the wording right where everybody in the room agreed with it, it really helps. And so that's what State Farm is all about. Everybody in the organization can kind of look at that and say, yeah, that is what we do. And as leaders, we can show our team members on a daily basis, this is what you're doing today. How does that support that mission statement? Help them to see that's a big part of it. Insurance can get to be, I'm sure, a pretty routine industry, but it is about people and their dreams. All right. Another good thing that we can do in terms of mission and vision statements is to talk to our customers. You know, at a university, it was pretty easy. Our students are our big customers, but what's important to them? How about your employees and then your stakeholders, the people who are impacted by your organization, what it does in the community? Try to gain some consensus from those people. A statement, theme, something along those lines. And having customers or stakeholders in your mission and vision process, yeah, it's going to slow it down. Yeah, it's going to drive a lot of questions, but you're going to get a better mission vision statement. And then go forward with it and set a plan to revisit it. It can't go on the shelf for 5 years. It's got to be something that you're looking at. And if there's a significant change in the organization, you need to get back on front on this, because this is on social media everywhere, especially with your millennial team members. Here's who I work for. Here's what they do. And it better match what your mission and vision statement are. So important things to definitely kind of go forward with. All right, so we've talked a little bit about mission and vision and some basics in implementation and how some organizations are doing this pretty well. I want to drive into some more nuts and bolts on strategies for this multi-generational workforce, specifically things that we can do to motivate, retain, and build better teams. So I'm going to start out with the boomers. And the idea of, used to be years ago when somebody got to be around 60, 65, we were looking to process them out the door. There's a retirement. And the recommendations that I'm seeing in the industry and the industries that are doing well is you want to keep your boomers as long as you possibly can. It's not like it was 10 or 20 years ago. You cannot, they used to tell us everybody can be replaced. In some cases, they can't. You cannot buy this experience and wisdom. You can't grow it from new employees. 30, 35, 40 years of experience is invaluable. Now, you may not be able to keep them in the same position that you did before, but we can offer flexible working arrangements. And this is something we hear a lot more about with millennials asking for flex time, doing something different. But some boomers have issues with elder care. Their parents are still alive. They may be in their 70s and their parents are in their 90s. And they need that. They need the flexibility in that also. Also, I saw something interesting is a trend in organizations that are trying to keep their boomers is to offer elder care as a part of the family care plans, the family care leave, things like that. And that isn't out there in a lot of cases. And it's like, when you talk to people, say, well, that's a pretty good idea. We should have that because their parents are living longer, and you know they need to help them. Phased retirements is something I've only been in university systems for a couple years, but they phase retirements of their faculty. It may be 2, 3, 4, 5 years as they go out the door, and they slowly dial back instead of somebody just unplugging and all that experience goes out the door. A lot of boomers would work longer if they only had to spend 75%, 50% of the time at the company or at the organization. And that phasing out of the retirement allows that knowledge, that experience to be passed along and not just unplugged and out there go. So those are some issues that we are definitely emphasizing with the boomers. With Gen X, one thing we found is they're pretty independent. We're labeling them as the most ignored generation. They were the first latchkey kids. They knew where the cookies were. A lot of them grew up in single-parent households, so they're pretty independent. But we want to focus on values development with them. Start developing them as leaders now. In a lot of cases, they might be ticked off in terms of not being able to move up. But we can get some horizontal leadership opportunities if the vertical ones aren't there. Talk to them about how they want to be developed, courses that they can get, and be honest with them that, the boomers ahead of you may have moved into that position in 5 years. It might be 15 for you. It might be 10 for you. How can we develop you in the meantime? Have honest conversations at this. The other thing they talked about, because they are so independent, they don't need as much checking up on, is let them work at their own pace, whether on duty time or normal 8 to 5 hours or off. Prioritize the work. As the leader, tell them what's important and they'll get it done. That's the one thing we've seen out of this group. And then also in terms of flexibility, that's a good thing. A lot of our Gen Xers do have one-parent households. Childcare is huge for these employees. And anything we can do to help out in that area is definitely going to be a plus. It's going to build engagement and get you better employees in the long run. Finally, our Gen Y, and that's who we've been focusing most on this series. We're calling them collaborators. That's a good definition of it. They prefer progress over pay. Pay is good, but they're looking for progress, and in a flat organization, that might be a challenge. If there's any opportunity for upward movement, whether it may not be in a hierarchical sense, but upward movement, upward development, in charge of informal work teams, that's going to be pretty important to them. The idea of mentor, mentor, mentor. I've heard from a lot of folks in the industry that they're begging for feedback, they're asking for it. And so on a regular basis, we want to coach. Positive, motivational, collaborative coaching seems to work with this industry, with this workforce generation. They don't work well on no news is good news. They need to know how they're doing it. And kind of where this came from was maybe how they were socialized, how they were brought up. We've heard a lot about helicopter parents and kind of what they brought to this. Teachers, participation trophies. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence that kind of get into this, but positive motivational coaching is a plus. If they're doing well, they need to know. It's definitely a plus. And to kind of zero in, one of the issues why we've heard millennials leave organizations, and they do leave, they leave more than any of the other workforce generations, is the idea is their work meaningful. They feel like what they're doing makes a difference. Does it attach back to the mission and vision? So on a regular basis, we want to show those folks how important it is, what they do, and how that does contribute to the big picture of the organization. That's an effort. That's something that's not natural, and it's something we're probably not doing for our Gen Xers or our boomers. I think it would help them also, but we definitely want to do it with this workforce generation because they need to know that it is important. This idea of reverse mentoring is pretty interesting in industries. One of the complaints about older employees, older workers, is they're not tech savvy, and one of the highlights of the millennials is they are pretty tech savvy. Normally, mentoring is a senior to a subordinate relationship or somewhere where somebody at a higher level in the hierarchical chain of the organization is mentoring people. But why not set mentoring for things like tech skills, about social media? Let's teach our older employees about this, and let's use our Gen Y folks in that environment. Gen Y employees were used to collaborating in school. They're used to doing a lot of group projects. They're used to working with folks. And we found they don't have a problem with telling a supervisor, a teacher, a parent if they're not doing something as well as they could. Let's take that boldness on, use it in our organizations, and allow them to engage in terms of reverse mentoring. All right. So we've looked at those workforce generations and some different ways of motivating them. we're going to look at this area, what we call, UCCS, we call it FIO, or figure it out. And what I mean by FIO is each workforce generation is a different way of figuring things out. And what we found over the years is the idea of going in, grinding and getting something done, figuring out how to find it. It's processed a little bit different. And in some cases, we found that boomers and Gen Xers are a little bit better at this, but our millennials are lacking in terms of developing this workplace skill or a muscle. And if you haven't ever used it before and you have to use it, it hurts. That's kind of how that works in that environment. So we want to teach these FIO skills because they're critical in kind of going forward. Okay, so I broke this out into like how we look at craftsmen in industries and trade industries. All right, so this group is the boomers, and I'm calling them the master craftsmen of FIO. They're really good at figuring things out. You give them a task, they're going to grab it, they're going to run with it, they're going to grind and get it out, and they're probably not going to come back to you until they've got it done. I got this. And they have been taught over the years that grinding, or what I call grinding, digging in, it's a good thing. It's something that should be appreciated. It should be rewarded, the idea of grinding. And we don't get that as much from some of the other workforce generations. This workforce generation has learned to live with a lot less, especially if you were in the world when they just started bringing computers into the system. And a lot of them weren't very good. And there wasn't a lot of training, and you just had to figure it out. You had to grind it and get there. So we find that with the boomers, they will initially, and what I'm going to use is kind of as a verb, they will FIO before asking for help. They're going to try to figure it out before they go to the boss and ask questions. And that's something they've learned over the years, and they take pride in it. And I think it's something that should be celebrated. So that's a good thing right there in terms of seeing where they're coming from and understanding why they kind of dig in that way. Although a lot of them may not be as technologically savvy with social media, the one thing I found from this workforce generation is they're expert users of technology. They're really good with a lot of the basic systems, the Excels and the Microsoft systems, and they figure out how to make it work. Sometimes there's better shortcuts, but they're going to get it. They're going to get it done, and they really have an appreciation for technological advances. And I was thinking about this years ago when computers first came into the work center where I worked. We had to have boot disks even to turn the things on. They didn't have enough memory even to start them up. So we had boot disks, and God forbid you lost a boot disk because you couldn't turn it on. There wasn't enough memory on the computer to run the startup sequence. So someone hands you an 8 gig flash drive and you're like, wow, that's really awesome. Where someone else is like, big deal. I could back up my whole computer on an 8 gig flash drive and have probably 4 gig to spare. So this workforce generation really appreciates the technology advances. And I think that's a good thing, because if you've been around it, you may not. You may not always like them. I was talking to some boomers the other day about Windows 10. And they said, yeah, I'm learning to hate it. And that's how it goes with a lot of these upgrades. We kind of get used to that, but we're going to make it work. We're going to grind it out. And so that's a good skill, and it's something for the other workforce generations to kind of look at in this idea of FIO. Our journeyman folks in this are our Gen X, and I think they're good at FIOing, and they're getting better. They've gotten better. They've seen that this is a skill set. Like I said, first generation latchkey kids, they know where all the snacks are in the house. They're able to navigate a lot of things, and they're used to being on their own. That's a good thing for FIO skills. And these are the folks that started the dot-com boom. There wasn't anything like that before, and they went in there and they completely transposed this industry. Another good thing about Gen Xers are they are results oriented, and they celebrate results. It's getting it done. Now that might be a different get it done than the boomers, where the boomers get it done and celebrate that. The Gen Xers want to get it done and go home. I got it done, I'm good to go, I hit your party, let me get out of here. So, that's a good thing. They like that off time, and it's important to them. So those are our journeymen. Other things on this is that I found is that The Gen Xers, it says they might leave some holes in the wall. And my idea on that is the sledgehammer isn't always the right tool for the job, and that seems like they'll go to that sometimes. They might leave some holes in the wall or damage some feelings when they're having those conversations. They need some boundaries in this. Yeah, I need you to get it done, but I don't want to have to clean up the mess afterwards. They're really good, and they value working less to achieve more. That's something where they might look at differently from the boomers who are going to initially grind it out. And they say, hey, there might be an easier way to do this. So, well, the boomer might say, by the time I figure that out, I'll have this done. Or a Gen Xer may look longer to try to find a faster way to do it. I've seen this in the past where something as simple as a hard copy of a document, and we need that in the system somehow. We need to get that electronic. A boomer's going to take that and just retype it. They're going to have it done, in 30 minutes. But that's I'm going to get that in the system. Give me that, I'll take care of it. A Gen Xer might spend an hour scanning that and trying to bring that back to a document versus doing that. They're both effective, but it's just a different approach. And so I think they can definitely learn from each other. In some cases, this workforce generation, like millennials, can be considered slackers because, they may not seek out the work, but I think as leaders, we need to tell them what's important and what we need to get done, and then they'll get it done. That's the good thing about this workforce generation. Last group was our millennials, and they definitely need training in terms of FIO, and there's a million reasons why. We can talk about this. They're victims of helicopter parents, or they've gotten too much help from teachers or coaches. So and I thought this was kind of interesting. Many of them have never failed before, ever at anything in their life. And I've seen this at the university. I'll walk through the halls and I'll see a student crying, and I'm like, are you okay? Is everything going all right? And they say, no, I just failed an accounting test. I'm like, really? I failed some accounting tests. Okay, but are you okay? And I said, I've never failed anything in my life. It's like, don't worry, there'll be more. It's gonna happen. So if you've never failed before and you fail, it really hurts. It's something, and as parents, we haven't allowed, parents of millennials haven't allowed their children to fail. So when they do, it can be a real issue. So I saw something really interesting on this from one of our staff members at UCCS. And she has student employees she works with all the time. And she got tired of the student employees when she gave them a task to continually come back at her and ask dozens and dozens of questions. And so when she gives them something, she says, you have 5 questions on this. I'm only going to allow you to ask 5 questions. And then you've got to figure this out. And they'll say, why 5 questions? Well, now you're down to 4. So she might be pretty tough on it. But in that sense it forces them to start using that FIO muscle, that FIO skill set that they've never done before. And she's serious about it. I've seen her say, look, you are out of questions. You need to get this done. And they might fail in this task, but it's not like the building's going to burn down or anything. But it's a great learning experience to have to go through this and realize you can only ask so many questions. And if we take a student that's been in an environment where they've been able to ask millions of questions and we put them in an industry like television, radio sales, they're going to drive their bosses crazy. So we've got to teach them about this, that they need training on this and that they can figure this out. It can be done. One of the things I found that really helps with this is telling employees when you give them a task that this is an FIO. This is a figure it out. I don't know how to do this. I need you to figure this out. A lot of times bosses don't want to do that. Sometimes we might give a task that we do know and we have experience on it, but a lot of things, it's never been done before. So let them know you don't know how to do this, and I need you to do this. And I ask students about this as they're going into the workforce. Are you hesitant about taking on new tasks, new plans, big projects? And a lot of them said, yeah, I don't want to do that because I don't want to fail. And the thing I tell them about, a lot of times if it's a new task, it's an FIO, it can't be a fail. The reality is if there is no plan and you come up with a plan, it is now the plan. It's going to move forward. You've moved it forward and it's a good thing. So don't be afraid to volunteer for those things that nobody's ever done before. And by doing this, once they've gone through this process a few times, and it's okay to let them fail. You can kind of watch them do it, providing they don't hurt anybody or themselves too bad. It builds these FIO muscle skills. They're quite a bit behind the other workforce generations. If you put one in a room with a boomer and they watch them retype a document, they're going to think that they're crazy, but there is something that they can learn from each other. And this is probably one of the big issues, is the idea of problem-solving skills. These are smart folks. They've got great skills, but if you haven't problem solved, you don't have a problem-solving skill. So we got to dig in on this and let them get a chance to do this in FIO. So I get a kick out of this FIO. We have a T-shirt at UCCS that says FIO on it, and my granddaughter asked. She says, "Pop-up, what's FIO?" And I said, "Figure it out." She says, "No, what does it mean?" And I said, "No, it's FIO. That's actually what it's about." So that's the first FIO she's learned. All right. So we'll continue to FIO, but this is and I think FIO can be used as a noun, a verb, adjective. You can use it. It's a great acronym, and we should trademark this thing. All right. So bringing this all together is critical, because we've talked a lot about these workforce generations, what motivates them, what we can do to keep them, and how to develop these FIO skills. Until things get different, until things change, we are still going to have to gear messages sometimes for each workforce generation. And this can be a real challenge. Gen X, we find that they're okay with informal messages communication. That's all right. Tell me what I need to do. I need to get this done. I need you to get this done. They'll get it done. Millennials, on the other hand, even if it's an informal communication, they're going to want to give you feedback on that process. And you got to let them know if this is okay or not. That's one of the boundaries that we've talked about with this workforce generation. They're very used to giving feedback, and I can tell you, as a faculty member at a university, they'll tell me when they don't like what I'm doing, which I would never have done as a student, but they're willing to do that. And with boomers, they're saying, please communicate. Please tell me what's going on. In our series before, we had a couple of millennial employees in television marketing, and they talked about the thing that shocked them was the amount of emails that they had to write. And the boomers are demanding that they use emails. So you've got a lot of mixed messages here, a lot of different ways of communicating. If you can level that playing field, establish some rules of engagement, but also from your end knowing what they're expecting and what they like, that might help you a lot with the engagement piece also. A big issue, I thought this was interesting, and this is when I was in corporate America. I had a human resource person talk to me at the end of an evaluation cycle, and they asked me how I like to be recognized. And no one had ever asked me that in over 25 years of work, how I like to be recognized. And I said, well, I really hadn't thought about that too much. And they said, well, do you like to be recognized in front of people? I'm like, not really. That's not my thing. I get embarrassed by that. And I said, I guess I prefer team recognition. So, we had a conversation on that. We want to recognize and reward people, but this is not a one-size-fits-all. And this can be a real demotivator. We've looked at, I show videos in my classes of collaborative workplaces, places like Zappos, and they've got open work areas and people have stuffed animals on their desk and they celebrate birthdays. They do that to me. That's kind of how I would respond. That's just not my thing. So it's a good employee. They want to recognize it, but if we don't recognize them the way they want to be recognized, that can be an issue. You could do it wrong, and that good thing can now be a real negative. So one thing that we find works across the workforce generation is this idea of team recognition. Multi-generational workforce teams need to be recognized for what they've done. And team recognition is usually lacking in organizations. Usually what I hear from people who work at organizations and the leaders of those organizations is it's tough to recognize teams. It's easier to recognize individuals. So this might be a more of a challenging thing to do to get the teams recognized. But if this is a critical thing for you, in getting a multi-generational workforce to work together and to have teams do well, then you need to recognize them appropriately. And that'll end up going a long way for sure. We talked about that in terms of multi-generational workforce. Diverse teams in terms of ages, genders, cultures, those need to be recommended and are rewarded also. Building those teams initially up with shared goals that can be communicated across all the boundaries and the communication methods will work well also with that. And just from, I guess, which can be a challenge sometimes with those teams, is if you've got members of each workforce generation, a mix of them together, the management leadership style may not work across the board for each of them. If some of them like more hands-on management, more who like hands-off, you've got to kind of work on that. So your Gen Xers and your millennials may want less hands-on. Feedback's okay, but can come pretty fast and quick. But you might need to ask them about that. Does this approach work with you? If we're going to have a conversation, where's a good place to have it? And I remember having a conversation with an employee when I was in working in distribution ops, and where she preferred to have those conversations, and she did not like to have work conversations in the boss's office. I didn't really drive down why that was, but it was pretty clear that wasn't a good place for her. So we'd find out that we'd get better feedback in like a break area or something, or on the floor. Some people just actually on the operations floor and have those conversations there. It needs to be what's comfortable for that employee. And yeah, there are times when some conversations shouldn't happen in an open area, but some people respond a lot better and become more engaged if we do that. With this, a lot of times, as we become more aware and more comfortable of the workforce generations, we can have tendency to stereotype people. And we've heard earlier that we've had millennial employees that really don't act like millennials. They're different, and if we categorize them or stereotype them, that can end up being a big fail. So don't overgeneralize the workforce generations. I saw this years ago. I was in an organization, and the leader of the organization was really big on MBTI, Myers-Briggs personality indicator. That was huge for them, and so we all had to take Myers-Briggs test. And on our desk, we had to have this little thing with these blocks, and it had our personality type. I'm an ISTJ, okay? So I have that on there. And it got to the point where people got pretty, I guess they got wise about this, but it got a little snarky too. Like they'd approach me with something like, oh, you're an ISTJ, that's right. You don't respond well to this type of approach. It's like, really? That's where that's coming from? And from a workforce generation thing, this is starting to become an HR issue in organizations. We're going to, eventually the EEOC is going to take on lawsuits with this, and we've had age discrimination in the past. It's usually been older employees being passed over for jobs. But if we overgeneralize some of the negatives with millennials, and they're getting a lot of it, and they're able to laugh at themselves pretty good, but there's a point where it becomes abusive. And we could instead of saying, oh, you're a millennial, you could insert a gender issue or a race issue or an ethnicity. It's almost at that point. And human resource organizations are struggling to take this on. There's so many funny millennial videos on YouTube about things that we can laugh at and make fun of them, but it gets to a point where it's not funny, it becomes mean or nasty or overgeneralized. And if you've made a fail like this, just like if you had with an issue with gender or race, that kind of cultural faux pas is something to it's really hard to overcome. People remember that stuff forever. So be careful with this. We can use the labels of workforce generations, at least we can for now. It might be outlawed in a couple years. We may get to that point. But don't overgeneralize it and make sure it doesn't turn into a negative. Let's look at the positive aspects of the workforce generations and use that as we go forward. Consider the similarities we talk about. Start with these things that everybody wants. Everybody wants the team to win. And we use a lot of sports metaphors in industry right now. We talk about that. Going into the Super Bowl here, both the Eagles and the Patriots, you got a group of team members. They all come from different parts of life, but everybody wants to win. And that's a great thing if you've got that as a motivator. I can imagine the intensity of the practices this week as those players prepare. They don't care if that person came from a different environment. They're on the same team. They want to hoist the Super Bowl trophy. Winning, kind of getting that across, is tougher in work teams. It's tougher to show what a win is, but that's why leaders need to define it. So every workforce generation wants to keep employed. They want to be a successful company. That's the winning part. So let's celebrate those wins, show what the wins are. And this is a great baseline, kind of a foundation in going forward, is starting with the similarities. We all want to win, and we need all of you with all the things you bring to the table to help us win. Here's another similarity. We all want good leaders. We all want leaders that lead by example. And when I ask about what lead by example is, we hear that a lot. It's like leaders that would never ask someone to do something that they wouldn't do themselves. And that's the idea. They're leading by example. They're working hard. The teams are working hard. This idea of accessibility, where there's a feel where you can talk to somebody in an organization. When you go into their office to talk to them, they give you the nonverbals by pushing all their other work aside, and the next 15 minutes I've got are with you. That's the most important thing. We like to be challenged as employees, and we want people held accountable. A lot of times we might not want to hear a negative when we do something wrong, but we certainly want other folks, if they haven't done well, to be held accountable. That just kind of moves the ball forward, keeps things fair. Coaches and mentors, everybody is looking for that. And just the driver that leaders do, there's something inside that tells you, I want to work harder for that person. There's a discretionary effort that's brought there. Lincoln's quote on this is, nearly all men and women can stand adversity, but if you want to test someone's character, give them power. And that's where we'll see. And if they don't respond well, these are all going to be fails here. And you're not just going to lose the millennials, you'll lose all the workforce generations. Another thing, everybody wants to be successful. We want to be on winning teams. We're all looking for a chance to be promoted. Be honest about that when those opportunities are going to go on. We want to work on challenging projects, but interesting projects, things that are going to bring out our best. That's the big issue. And one thing we've seen, regardless of workforce generation, and even where we've got studies that show that there are things more important than money to some workforce generation, everybody wants financial success. Everybody wants the team to win and to be paid fairly. So that's another thing that we can agree upon across all the workforce generations. Okay, so at this point we normally have some aha moments, but we're going to go ahead and pass that and kind of move on and kind of wrap this up. So here's what we talked about today in this last series, is who is doing this right? And the answer is there aren't a lot of people doing this right across the workforce generations. We looked at Fortune's best companies to work for, and we saw some repeats, but not across all workforce generations. So there's a lot of work to be done. The idea of invigorating your mission and vision statements, bring your millennial team members in there. They'll make it exciting again. This is a big part of who they are, and it's something that they can all work with. We looked at the different strategies for each workforce generation, and I kind of went that into our FIO, our figure it out skills, and how we've seen that we need to use the FIO skills that some of our other workforce generations have and help develop our millennials in that area. And finally, we talked about bringing it all together, bringing those teams together. Start with what makes us the same, and then use the diversity we bring to even make it better. And that's all we have for this series. Thanks for everybody watching, and I hope you got a lot out of it. Thanks.